out. Everybody.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Lights Out. I'm your host, Josh. I'm joined in our haunted studio by my co-host, Austin. Just reminding everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, did something happen that I missed?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be surprised if something happens during today's recording, honestly.
All right, we'll see.
We'll see. And also our producer, Danny. How's it going, man?
It's going good. How's everybody else doing?
We are back today with another one for you. Today we're going to be diving into the world of polygamy and the Fundamentalist Mormons, specifically a group led by Ervil LeBaron. And he has been called the Mormon Manson, and for good reason.
Yes. If anything, he's almost scarier than Manson, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd have to agree.
A lot more destruction at play here.
He's really running like the Mormon Mafia.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yes.
I mean, it's that level of operation.
100%. And before we piss off any Mormon listeners out there, we do want to clarify this is a sect of
extreme
Mormonism.
Sect, yes.
Yeah, so this is basically a cult that spawned off of Mormonism.
Right. The church actually kicked him out.
Yes.
And then he started this cult. I mean, there's tons of Mormon fundamentalist groups out there, and Ervil is on a mission.
Definitely. And not only was he kicked out of the Mormon church, his brother then kicked him out of that cult. So it's like layers of being kicked out of shit because you're just too problematic.
Right. He just gets more and more violent and ruthless as time goes on. And I think he's the epitome of an evil cult leader.
Yeah.
I mean, his manipulation and level of brainwashing and just this, rule by fear, extreme fear, and violence.
Yes. And using bloodlines and family to manipulate people too,
Yeah, it's quite crazy. So, I mean, for me personally, I really find the whole world of polygamy, especially Mormon fundamentalist groups, very interesting. I don't know if that's weird to say.
No.
But I think there's something just so wild about it and just so intriguing. And obviously most groups don't end up doing what Ervil and his group do, but I've definitely watched my fair share of documentaries. And I mean, TLC has a wide range of different polygamous shows and different families. And I've watched them all. So I'm not
Sister Wives and all that.
Sister Wives, and there's Seeking Sister Wife, which is like non-Mormons who are living polygamy, which is interesting. But then obviously the story of Warren Jeffs and all of the, things that happen with that, which that'll probably be an episode one day.
Yeah. And a lot of cult leaders practice polygamy, not even just Mormon cult leaders, but just cult leaders in general. I always think about it because what if somewhere along the line in history, I always think, not to get on my soapbox here, but, there's like these main world religions, right? And mostly those have dictated whether we are a polygamist culture or not. And I always think, what if somewhere along the way, like, what if Mormonism was way bigger back in the 1800s and really took over the entire U.S.? Would the U.S. as a nation be a polygamist nation? Who knows?
That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I was wondering because it's really dictated by whatever is the controlling religion, and obviously, like you dive deeper into like capitalism, the patriarchy, et cetera, but really it comes down to what's the biggest religion gets to kind of determine marriage laws at the end of the day.
Especially with the level of reproduction happening in these families.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Ervil had 50 plus children.
Yeah. That's so crazy to think about.
That's insane.
You have one child and, it's very like a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
So if you have 50 children, you must not really care about, you'd get their names mixed up. You don't know who the hell anybody is at some rate, right?
No. And I mean, the actual childhood that these kids have is sad in a lot of ways. I mean, you definitely miss out on that connection with, it's so important as a developing child to have that connection with your parents and your father. That father relationship's super important. So to rarely see them, even with the show Sister Wives, like he only has 4 wives, but he has 20 children, I believe, somewhere around there.
Wow.
And just seeing the, relationships, when they're grown up, it's not there. And there's a lot of issues, and it's just, how can you, I couldn't even imagine. I have 1 child, I have a bunch of pets, and that takes so much time out of my day. And to have 20 children that you have to parent and be there for, multiply that times 2, and then add a bunch more wives to it. It's just impossible.
Yeah. I couldn't even imagine. I not only can I not imagine having 1 child, I can't imagine having 20.
13 wives or whatever.
Yeah. At what point do they just become a number, really? And it's more like you're checked out. How can you be emotionally invested in all of those relationships and all those children at once? It doesn't seem feasible.
And I think that's why so many people have issues with polygamy, and it's very controversial, right? I'm all for people having freedom over their bodies and freedom over their relationships, and polygamy as a whole, I think is interesting, because should people have the right to, marry as many people as they want and be, in as many relationships at one time as they want? I think, why not? As long as it's consensual and there's an out for everybody, and it doesn't, no harm is done, and that's the tough part, is it seems like 9 times out of 10 harm is done, and maybe it's not intentionally done, but it's just done it happens as a byproduct of that type of relationship. And I think that's the big question, and kind of where, the current state of polygamy it's illegal, right? Like across the United States.
Yep. I always think that the one unfair part about it, a lot of times, especially in situations like this, it's always one man with multiple wives. You never see it the other way around.
There is a show.
Is there, with one woman with a bunch of husbands? Yeah. That's awesome.
Brother husbands, I think is the term that is used.
Is it a fundamentalist?
No.
Okay, it's not.
It's not religious at all. Because I don't think the Mormons don't believe that it should be the other way. It's only this way.
Right.
A man with multiple wives, not a woman with multiple husbands.
Exactly. Because the man has to be in control in these relationships. But I've read, I don't know, I had friends, they were like, read The Ethical and read Sex at Dawn. It's like these books that bring these ideas of if we're biologically even supposed to be in relationships that are just monogamous, that we have one life partner forever. Are we programmed that way? Are we not?
Or is that societal programming?
Yeah, exactly. Because if we look at bonobos, which is Sex at Dawn focuses on a lot, which their DNA is incredibly close to ours, they live in these societies where they all share partners, and they're really peaceful and stuff, but they're also a fraction off of chimps. But chimps are crazy, and they kill each other. And so I don't know, it's kind of fascinating reads if you want to read more into cultures and societies that accept having multiple partners at once. Personally, I think it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
People get Excel spreadsheets on who they're dating, on what it's Tuesday at 8, gym.
Yeah.
And it gets out of control for me. I can't wrap my head around it, but hey, I'm not against it if you do it with
some people can
adults.
Do it, and it's not an issue, and it enhances their lives and enhances their children's lives. It's more people to be involved with children, and I think that's the good side of it. And there's positives and negatives to everything, but
true, you
could say that about literally monogamous relationships or any other type of relationship, really.
Very true.
So, but again, Ervil takes these concepts and just takes it to, this guy is a literal demon. Mm-hmm. The fact that he is, a god in his eyes, or close to one, is alarming. And it becomes very clear that what his intentions are. And he's got evil pumping through his bloodstream for sure.
Greed, control, bloodlust, you name it, he's got it.
So yeah, this is a wild one. There was a documentary that came out, or a docuseries on Hulu, Daughters of the Cult, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one is interesting because it's actually a lot of his kids who have finally come forward and talking about their experiences growing up with Ervil, and just how crazy of a life It really was. And some of the things that they saw and had to do is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a truly brutal individual, and his crimes are next level. So let's just go ahead and dive right in, I think. And, we got to go all the way back to the very beginning with Mr. Ervil and figure out how did this monster start out his life. So Ervil's parents, Alma Dare LeBaron, who went by Dare LeBaron, belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, which we all know. This was up until his excommunication on February 17, 1924, for practicing plural marriage, which was banned in the U.S. in 1890. And that's even today is a big misconception about Mormons, is that they're still practicing, polygamy within the LDS Church.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very small amount of people who aren't even officially recognized by the Mormon Church.
And it's been a long time since that was allowed within the LDS Church.
Yeah.
I don't think I didn't even realize that until I started learning about it. I didn't realize it was the late 1800s that they actually banned that.
Yeah, and usually when they started seeing legal pressure on their church, that's when they were like, okay, well, we don't want to lose our tax
exempt status. Yeah, I remember it was the federal government was like, hey, like we're going to strip you of your non-profit status, basically. Yeah.
Fun little fact about the Mormon Church. The government started putting pressure. They're like, hey, we noticed you're not including people of color in your church. Why is that? We'll get into Brigham Young a little bit later, but that was when the government was like, hey, do you still want that tax exemption? And they were like, okay, people of color, come on in.
Right. So following his exile, Dare, along with his 2 wives and 8 children, relocated to Colonia Juarez in Chihuahua, Mexico. Plural marriage was still legal at the time, and while there, he found employment as a painter and took on odd jobs, and he became known for his energetic demeanor, as well as being a harsh disciplinarian. So, maybe Ervil got some inspiration from his own father and his own experiences. His son, Ervil LeBaron, was born on February 22nd, 1925. He was raised in 2 red brick homes that were abandoned by Mormon settlers during the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s. Dare gradually restored these homes as his family grew larger. He ended up fathering 7 sons with his wife, Maud McDonald, which included Benjamin Ross Alma Jr., Florin Verlin, Joel, and Ervil LeBaron. Ervil and his brother Joel were close in age and inseparable as children. They were viewed by friends and family as a single entity because one couldn't be without the other. They later ran the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times together, which was a sect that formed as an offshoot of the Mormon Church. But the brothers' dynamic would change pretty drastically over time, as you'll see. For more than 15 years, the brothers worked closely until their relationship began to sour. Ervil started stealing money from the church for personal use. Church members noticed Ervil's increasingly extravagant lifestyle, driving luxury cars and wearing expensive suits, while his many wives and over 50 children lived in poverty. Over time, the brothers also developed different fundamental beliefs. Ervil promoted the strict enforcement of God's laws through harsh punishment, drawing from the old Mormon doctrine of blood atonement. Blood atonement is when a sinner is atoning for an eternal sin. They are killed in a way that allows their blood to be shed upon the ground as a sacrificial offering. This is thought to save them from becoming a son of perdition, or someone who will not take part in the glory of God in the afterlife. Meanwhile, Joel is strongly against blood atonement. He was much more peaceful than Ervil and openly claimed that he would never approve of taking a life under any circumstance, which seems to fall in line with what the Bible teaches. And, that's a pretty basic
thou shalt not kill. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the 10th commandment.
As their disagreements intensified, Joel faced the painful decision of removing Ervil from his position as president of the Church of the Firstborn, because he's getting a little crazy for his liking. And by the mid-60s, Ervil's lust for power continued to grow. Ervil's behavior caused countless problems between him and his brother over the years, and he had a habit of stealing other men's wives, which is definitely going to create issues, and just being lazy overall. He would argue that his time was better spent reading scripture instead of doing physical labor like the rest.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can't till the fields today. I'm reading the Bible. And talking to Mormons, they'd probably be like, oh, yeah. No, that's good. He's a holy man. We should let him read the Bible.
while his family's living in poverty
Yeah, right.
with no running water, and his kid literally forcing his kids to do slave labor practically
Total
while
scumbag.
he's just kicking back, reading the scripture.
I see him in a bathtub. He's got the Bible cracked open and like just chilling out. Little lemon in his glass of water.
Having his kids bring him food.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're just sweating and wearing tattered clothes, and he's got his fancy suits hanging up.
Yeah, right.
Well, Joel's Church of the Firstborn was a beautiful beachfront settlement located in Baja, California. He called it Los Molinos, which he founded in 1964, and the property was 8,500 acres, including 9 miles of beachfront access, which, if you've never been to Baja, California, the beach is there. Super nice.
Yeah. So
beautiful.
That's prime real estate.
It really is. 9 miles too? That's serious. Like, wow.
How did he snag this?
I don't know. 8,500 acres too?
Right.
They just like go out there and be like, this is ours. And nobody came and said no. Well, several dozen of Joel's followers included Mexican and American firstborners, as they were called, who lived on the property, constructed adobe huts, planted wheat fields, and raised goats. Joel and Ervil fought over how to manage the property, including how to use the land. While Joel had envisioned it as an agricultural paradise where poor Mormons could work on this communal farm, Ervil thought, no, we'll make a lot more money if this is a tourist paradise. Despite Joel's opposition, Ervil gathered up investors in the United States and flew them down to view the oceanfront property. He showed them his visions of where the resorts and yacht club could be located. Once when a deal began to fall through, he offered the potential investors a few, quote, nubile women if they would, quote, join his ball team.
Gross.
So he's just like offering up, and probably his own wives even.
Right.
To satisfy these investors as they came down.
Besides trafficking women, before this is the only thing I will agree with Ervil on probably in this entire episode, is that he's not wrong that the oceanfront property would probably have been a cool tourist spot.
Yeah. No doubt.
Not a bad idea.
I think that's what makes them so dangerous. And not that that's like rocket science to figure out.
Yeah.
Do a farm and basically try to help poor people, or do we bring the rich in and make this a resort town, basically?
Right.
But he's definitely, he's not dumb as rocks. Like he's definitely got a little bit of wit to him.
He's a schemer.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Definitely a schemer. He ended up bringing in truckloads of Mexican converts at a faster rate than the colony could feed and clothe them, which cost the church even more money. And to make matters worse, Ervil also tried a number of get-rich-quick schemes, of course, back to being a schemer, to support the LeBaron ministry over the years. This included a gambling trip to Las Vegas, a fish-selling business, and harvesting pine nuts from the National Forest in California, which I'm sure is illegal.
Yeah, there's no way you could do that.
How did that even work? You just got like a bunch of guys out there and just running through the forest with baskets, shaking limbs.
Hoping that the park ranger doesn't catch them.
That's so weird. But all these business ideas ultimately failed. The sect ended up losing vast amounts of money, and one by one, cult members, who were again called the firstborners, were limited to wearing rags and eating porridge. Any cult member who had jobs outside of Los Molinos were required to give 10% of their wages to the ministry. And guess who's in charge of collecting those payments? Mr. Ervil. When anyone questioned him about his flashy golden Impala, which they dubbed, quote, the golden calf, he said God told him to buy it because it would impress his potential converts. Sure, dude.
Good argument. I mean, I've heard cult leaders do that before. Like, what's the big one where they bought all the Rolls Royces?
Oh, yeah.
And like the private jets and stuff. Yeah, same argument. It's like, no, this is all for
Scientology.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But yeah, so after a while, Ervil's thirst for power took a pretty dark turn, as you could imagine. And when he wasn't chasing other men's wives or spending all the church's money on luxury items, he would dive really deep into the Old Testament. And there are some pretty dark things in the Old Testament, you know? He soon came to believe that he had the right to strike down anyone who disobeyed him. Some belief systems saw the breaking of the Ten Commandments as punishable by death, so Ervil figured, hey, Same rules should apply to me and this Mormon sect as well. Why not? He came up with a series of decrees based on the 10 Commandments, which he called, quote, the civil law. And he appointed, who do you think? Himself as the law's chief enforcer. He also decreed that people would die for breaking any of the civil law commandments. So Ervil's congregation noticed his excitement as he revealed the ancient death rituals he would use against any transgressor. And these included pretty old school punishments, disembowelment,
Jesus,
stoning, and beheading. So it's not like this dude's going Old Testament.
Disembowelment. I don't remember ever reading a Bible story about disembowelment.
Right. God.
What?
And he decided to implement what he felt was a time-honored method of making people obey using the threat of physical violence. And the concept was pretty simple. If you disobeyed, you would feel pain. If your disobeying was bad enough, you would die. According to Ervil, the fear of spanking kept children in line, the fear of torture made prisoners talk, the fear of hell kept Christians on the straight and narrow, and the fear of death kept many Mormons compliant under the leadership of Brigham Young, the church's second prophet. So, if you don't know anything about Brigham Young, we can't really do a whole bio on him here. Massive leader in the Mormon church. To this day, people still quote him. Super problematic guy, super racist, has a lot of bad takes on his track record, but
yep, there's a university called Brigham Young University.
Yeah, and you've probably seen they went viral years ago. It was just the TikTok that went and interviewed the students there, and they were like, would you rather...
Oh, like I've seen these, yeah.
Would you rather drink a cup of coffee or like punch someone in the face or something like that? And they would have to decide between these two things. Some of the responses were very odd, but some were like, oh, there's level-headed people in here. They're not all up the church's ass. But,
yeah.
But yeah, Brigham Young, very controversial. Young believed that if someone strayed from his flock, the only way that person could receive the glory of God in the afterlife was if they were killed by a righteous assassin. So, as we mentioned before, this is called Blood Atonement. When Josh and I start our metal band, we're going to...
Dude, we got to call it Blood
Atonement.
I bet you there is a band.
There has to be, right?
Called Blood Atonement.
But Daniel, look this up. Is there one?
They have an upcoming album called Carcosa?
Sweet.
They're German.
Oh,
nice.
Interesting.
Nice.
I wonder if there's any, they drew inspiration from Brigham Young, or if...
Yeah.
I feel like Blood Atonement is, I've seen that in video games, and like...
For sure.
It's not like an original term, I feel like.
But yeah, Brigham Young was really into this, and he gave his followers a sermon about it on September 21st, 1856. He said, quote, "There are sins that men commit for which they cannot receive forgiveness in this world, or in that which is to come. And if they had their eyes open to see their true condition, they would be perfectly willing to have their blood spilt upon the ground as an offering for their sins." I like very, very carefully worded. We don't say we're killing anyone. We're not murdering anyone. We're spilling their blood as an offering for their sins. It's all for the glory of God.
Right. And to kind of help get them to the afterlife, get them to
Right.
heaven.
This is for their own good.
Right.
Yeah. Which that's really dark.
Yeah.
But during the 1850s, Young used Blood Atonement to basically just start eliminating spiritual and business rivals. It wasn't really about, getting people to the glory of God. It was more like, this is my enemy. I need to take them out. Luckily, the church renounced it during the late 1800s, but 100 years later, Ervil decided to take it upon himself to reinstate it in his sect.
Because he wants to help people get to the afterlife, or it's a convenient method to get rid of your rivals.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which reason is he doing it for? I think it becomes very clear.
Yeah, and as a schemer, you sell it as the idea that
exactly.
It's for their own good, but really it's for his own personal gain.
Well, if you already have all of your followers convinced that you're like this prophet and you're connected to the Almighty, then it's not a hard sell at that point.
Not at all.
And I mean, many of these people that followed him like grew up in this. Like, this is all they know. So the brainwashing is next level. I mean, it is, they truly, truly believe that they were doing this for the glory of God.
Yes.
And that Ervil was, in contact or virtually a god in their eyes. And so they just went along with it. They're just like, okay, this sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. He essentially just thought of himself as a Mormon prophet.
Right.
And he had a direct line to God,
Right.
So the first person Ervil wanted to kill was a man named Reulen Allred, a rival polygamist from Utah. And apparently he had refused to pay Ervil and had publicly ridiculed the firstborners. In one of his typically long speeches, Ervil declared that Reulen was guilty of character assassination, which was an offense that, was to Ervil, quote, punishable by death.
Is that in the 10 Commandments? Guilty of
character assassination. Yeah,
I'm like, what happened to the 10 Commandments here?
Yeah, right.
Like, nah.
He's basically rewritten his own commandments at this rate, is what it feels like.
He's like, nah, we're not going to mess with the court system.
Yeah.
We'll just settle this Old Testament style.
It's a wild. Also, yeah, character assassination. What a petty thing to.
Yeah, it seems like he's got a fragile ego.
100%. Yeah, it's a good point.
And he's got to appear strong. I mean, if you choose to rule by fear, strength is the number one asset to you, right? So you've got to appear strong to your followers. And in turn, it creates more fear and more loyalty to you because they're scared of you.
Yeah.
So it makes sense why he did this. Obviously, morally, a major issue there.
Yeah, seriously. And one of the weird parts about it is that Reulen and Ervil had once been friends, which is wild. In the 1950s, Reulen evaded an arrest warrant in Utah for cohabitation by hiding out at the Colonia LeBaron in Mexico. But despite their friendly history, Ervil still wanted to kill his old friend over 20 years later.
So even if you're good friends with him, you're not safe.
Nope.
And as Joel watched his brother scare the firstborners with his violent threats and continued to pitch his idea of a Mormon utopia to investors, he was fed up. Ervil told him in the summer of 1972 that God said he and Joel should run the church as equals. Because Joel was the leader. I mean, he was the one leading this whole operation, and Ervil was second in command. But now Ervil wants more power, and Joel finally put his foot down because he obviously sees the road Ervil's going down, and he's not liking it whatsoever. Joel had already been slowly removing him from a position of leadership altogether, but this was really the final straw for him. And Ervil was stunned by the news. He even cried in front of the congregation when the announcement was made, which is kind of ironic.
Yes, for someone who wants to be seen as like this terrifying
disciplinarian enforcer, just see him like crying.
Yeah.
When they tell him, sorry, we're removing you from power.
Yeah.
And the brothers ended up splitting the colony, and families were forced to choose sides and argued about who was the true prophet amongst the two. In response, Ervil started his own church in San Diego called the Church of the Lamb of God after the famous band. No, I'm just kidding. I wonder, when I heard he started the Church of Lamb of God, I'm like, I wonder where Lamb of God got their, that's a term that's just like biblical,
I wonder where that originated.
I've always been curious where they got Lamb of God.
Because I know in certain prayers in Catholicism, we would say, Lamb of God would show up. Oh, Lamb of God is a title for Jesus that appears in the Gospel of John. Wow, I'm ashamed I didn't know that. I feel like I should have known that one. It appears John 1:29, where John the Baptist sees Jesus and exclaims, quote, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Okay, I do know that quote.
Yep.
And it appears again later. So there you go.
Ever since I turned 30 this past year, I've been really trying to work on my health. And one of the things that has always been a pain point when it comes to just getting healthy, staying healthy, has been which vitamins and supplements to take. For the longest time, I just wander into the store and I'd look at all of the different vitamins and supplements, and I would just be completely lost. I'd never know which ones I should be taking, so I'd end up buying just a multivitamin and then walking out. Over the last year, I've learned from my own research and from Care of that there's so many other vitamins and supplements that I should be taking that I wasn't getting in my daily multivitamin. So if you're not familiar with Care of, it's a health and wellness company that ships high quality personalized vitamins, supplements, and powders conveniently to your door every month. It's one of those set it and forget it type of things. And what I love about Care of is that they make you take a personal online quiz, which asks you a bunch of different questions about your health, your wellness goals, and then it gives you doctor-backed recommendations for which supplements and vitamins you should be taking, which is awesome. I've definitely noticed a difference in my health and just general well-being by taking my vitamins and supplements every day. And I just love the convenience of Care of. I don't have to think about it. It just shows up at my door when I run out, and it's super easy to use. And I can add and remove as I want. You don't have to go with all the doctor-backed recommendations. You can pick and choose. Maybe you don't want all 10, which I have 10 that I currently get in my packs every single month. It's also nice that you can customize it. You don't have to go with all of the doctor-backed recommendations, but you can pick and choose what you want, and you can stop and start that subscription whenever you want as well. So it's just super easy service. Absolutely love it. And I've got a special offer for you. For 50% off your first Care of subscription order, go to takecareof.com and enter code LIGHTSOUT50. If you take advantage of this offer, you get 50% off your first Care of subscription order by going to takecareof.com and use code LIGHTSOUT50. So he's got this church going, the Lamb of God, and he immediately starts turning on his brother by just saying a bunch of angry things about him to his followers. And he felt that Joel's disregard for his authority was, again, quote, an act of treason against heaven that carried the penalty of death. So, see where this is going.
Yep.
On August 20th, 1972, Joel LeBaron and his 14-year-old son Ivan had gone to the house of a Church of Lamb disciple to pick up a car. And while Ivan waited outside the residence, Ervil's thugs jumped his father inside. Ivan heard someone yell, "Kill him," followed by gunshots. Men then fled the house and sped off in a station wagon, and Ivan ran inside to find his father lying face up on the floor, blood pooling around his shoulders and 2 bullet holes in his head. Just cold-blooded murder.
Yeah.
A man named Daniel Jordan, who was a follower of Ervil LeBaron, who was also married to one of their nieces, had murdered Joel. Ervil assumed that after his brother's death, the divided firstborners would all just come and join him. Instead, Ervil faced murder charges in Mexico, and the firstborners picked a new leader, the youngest LeBaron brother, Verlin.
I love that. This idiot thought it was like, I'll just murder him. Like, what is this, old medieval
They'll love
times?
me after that, yeah.
I just kill my brother and usurp control over his lands. Oh, that's not how this works.
No, they're like, fuck you, dude.
Yeah.
You're the last person we're going to go follow.
Right.
Joel's funeral was attended by 7 widows and 44 children, which is just sad. I mean, this is, a husband, a father as well. And his brother, Verlin, took over the church soon after. Much like Joel, Verlin had a quiet demeanor and preferred working long hours on the farm, spending time with his 9 wives and 50-plus kids, and delivering sermons. Meanwhile, Verlin got the feeling that he was next on his brother Ervil's hit list, so he kept a low profile and never stayed in one place too long, which is also just sad because he had to constantly move around and just stay hidden so Ervil wouldn't find him. He even changed cars quite often and residences so that he couldn't be found. In December 1972, Ervil strolled into the Ensenada police station along with his 2 lawyers. They demanded the murder charges be dropped. He was tired of dodging the cops and claimed he needed to travel freely in order to convert more followers, which is like, what?
Yeah.
How does that make any sense, dude?
Also, speaking of ego, imagine like murdering someone or calling for the murder of someone, same difference, and then rolling into the police station and be like, drop the charges now.
I need to move freely and do more murders. The police were shocked that a murder suspect would just come strolling into the police station. I mean, they've been looking for this guy for months, and he just casually walks in. So they were like, okay, cool, perfect. And they just threw him in jail. And which I'm like, what did he think was going to happen? That they were just like, okay, no problem. We'll drop the charges and stop looking for you.
Do you think his delusion is like so deep that he's like, I am the prophet of God, so they can't touch me? Do you think it's something like that?
I think so. It's got to be. While he waited in jail, his mother wrote him a letter saying Ervil, quote, should not be in jail, but in a mental hospital, which sounds accurate.
Yeah, thanks, Mom.
Ervil finally went to trial 9 months later, and he was found guilty of homicide, but he was only sentenced to 12 years. And the issue that they had was that the prosecution couldn't place Ervil at the crime scene. And again, we're talking about Mexico, so very different criminal justice process down there. And Ervil ended up only serving 1 day in prison before being set free on February 14th, 1974. because the Mexican Supreme Court overturned a conviction on a technicality. Apparently, Ervil's co-defendants, the ones who physically committed the murder, didn't show up for the trial, so they just set him free.
They're like, "You're good to go, man."
Like, all right, well, it still doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I'm like,
this reads to me like some money being passed around, some corruption.
A judge got paid off or something. Because what?
Yeah, this makes no sense.
I mean, this would definitely not happen in the United States, but as we all know, Mexico's criminal justice system is a whole nother monster for sure.
Yeah.
So after getting away with murder, Ervil's like, great, I'm going to get all my followers back together, at least the ones that are loyal to him, and they went to Yuma, Arizona. The followers started referring to him as, quote, Lord Anointed, one might and strong, and prophet of God. So elevating his status, and his ego's getting bigger and bigger. And now he's presenting himself as even more powerful than he was before. Because he's probably like, look, guys, I got out of prison.
Yeah, they couldn't even get me for murder.
Right.
I'm untouchable. Yeah. As time passed, Ervil started to become paranoid that Verlin's firstborners would retaliate against him. So he started carrying a gun and forced all of his wives and children to take shooting classes. His paranoia would only worsen over time, and he was often seen pacing back and forth in front of his family and followers, telling them they could all be slaughtered at any moment. And he forced each of them to take an alias, get a new driver's license and birth certificates to form new identities so they couldn't be tracked. And they were only allowed to make phone calls from payphones so that they couldn't be traced.
Which seems like very calculated because he's got a lot of plans.
Yeah, for sure.
And he's like, I'm going to do better this time and make sure I don't get caught.
Right.
Or at least he thinks that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I also wonder if it's, you change everybody's names and stuff where it's like, it seems like, oh, I'm just paranoid. I'm worried I'm being tracked. I'm worried that other people are after me. But I also wonder on the flip side of that coin, if it's like, no, we're all changing our identities because we're going to commit some crimes.
Right.
So 2 ways to see that. Ervil also wrote an essay titled Hour of Crisis, Day of Vengeance, which, come on. It's right, Day of Vengeance. Like, you can tell this guy's just out for blood.
That's definitely what Jesus would want.
Yeah, right. God, we've fallen so far, haven't
Revenge.
we? Yeah. And it's inspired by the King James Bible. The document itself, apparently, it's really hard to read. It's incoherent. Even to firstborners, they had to read it several times before being able to decipher any of it. But
have you ever read a King James Bible?
Yeah, I have, way back. Very strange, but
tough read.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I've actually, just a little side note, I kind of want to go and read the Bible front to back.
Same.
Just as a
I was thinking about
challenge
that
for
the
myself.
other day.
Yeah. It'd probably be
King James version.
I won't do King James version. I'll do New American or whatever it is, or I'll learn Hebrew or Arabic and read some really old school texts.
They've got they've got like comic book style now.
What?
Yeah.
Like graphic novel
Bible. Yeah. On Amazon.
Sick.
I'm like, that seems like fun.
I'm down.
Like, that'd be entertaining.
That. Yeah, that would be wild.
I want to see some of these stories. I want to like see it play out.
Yeah.
Did you know there's a video game coming?
The Jesus video game. Yeah, I've seen this.
It's very interesting. Yeah, it's like taking you through the whole story of Jesus.
I'm down.
With like Unreal Engine 5 graphics. Yeah. Where you can like visit Jerusalem back in the day and go through. It's like a RPG open world type game. I saw it on TikTok, I think, and I was like, whoa.
I Am Jesus Christ, I think it is. I think Daniel might have showed this to me a few months ago. Did you?
Or no, it's not this one. They're calling it an MMO, I think.
What?
Yeah. Gate Zero.
Gate Zero.
Yeah, it's called Gate Zero is the game. It's not out yet, but it's by Bible X Games.
New Christian video game.
Where you can play the Bible, travel back in time and explore ancient Judea, Galilee, overcoming opposing forces, and experience the Bible firsthand. You can wishlist it on Steam.
That's pretty wild. All right, Daniel, you ready to live stream this?
I'm ready.
When it comes out. The game starts out in the year 2072 in the dystopian world of Terrapolis.
Yeah.
You and your cousin Hector receive a cryptic mission from your eccentric late grandmother. She offers the chance to win her whole inheritance if you unlock the secrets of her mysterious, quote, pearl. You and Hector decide to solve this mystery by going back to the source in his time machine, Gate Zero.
And you see it all unfold.
It's a Bible sci-fi story. This is wild.
Play the Bible? Don't read it.
Yeah,
Play the Bible.
Go and
just,
visit it. Yeah.
That's honestly pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Totally random tangent, but
yes. Back to
Ervil.
Back to Hour of Crisis, Day of Vengeance. But yeah, this book, I mean, basically he just has a list of demands for the followers. And among other things, he demands that the congregation pay their dues to him directly, citing that, quote, it is a criminal offense punishable by death for an enlightened people to pay offerings to thieves and robbers, in parentheses, and other fundamentalist leaders. In other words, anyone who hadn't paid their dues to Ervil should be killed. And it's hilarious that this guy writes the book, and then he's like, I'm going to cite my own book because that's law now. It's wild. But many ignored his command, so he decided the firstborners needed to be punished, and he then announced another revelation. It was that they must destroy Los Molinos, which, if you remember, that's his brother Verlin's commune. On the day after Christmas, he sent his followers across the border into Baja under cover of night, strapped down with firebombs and assault weapons. Around 30 firstborn families who were gathered around the wood-burning stove saw a pickup truck and a Fiat slowly crawl down the dirt road towards their little commune. Eventually, someone threw a Molotov cocktail into the window of the town's largest house, and within seconds, the wood frame structure was engulfed in flames, forcing the occupants outside. In the confusion that followed, Ervil's thugs began gunning down the people rushing to form a water brigade in their attempt to put the flames out, which that's bold. It's like we're under attack, and these poor people are like, well, let's put out the fire to try and save our commune rather than like run for their lives is wild to me.
This is like a mafia hit. It's
really?
Like, or worse.
Yeah, this is an act of terrorism.
Yeah. My God.
Yeah. His men made their way through the entire settlement, throwing firebombs into homes, and they were making their way to Verlin's house. He was their main target. But Verlin wasn't even home at the time. Only his wife, Charlotte, 6 of their children were. And when they saw the truck with 5 armed men heading toward their house, they ran and hid out in the nearby orchard as Ervil and his men shot up and set fire to their house. And this attack lasted about 20 minutes. It left 2 men dead, 13 people wounded. And Ervil, after the attack, he just flew into a rage because he realized his brother Verlin was still alive somewhere. They didn't take out their main target. After Ervil took control of Los Molinos, he had even larger plans of taking over the Mexican and United States government, and eventually the entire world.
Pure delusion.
Completely. He decided to finance his goal of total world domination by killing off all of his religious rivals and stealing their business.
Because that's going to work.
Right? At this point, the Lamb of God Church was mostly made up of Ervil's wives and children, which, there were many. It was dozens and dozens of people by this point. But enough of his other followers who weren't directly blood related were having kids to keep the cult growing beyond Ervil's family. And Ervil made sure to keep control of all of his followers' romantic and sexual relationships. Ervil claimed first dibs on all the females, arranged marriages between his followers, and gave his daughters away to men he wanted to cement relationships with or to reward for good behavior. It really reminds me of medieval bloodlines and houses and stuff like that.
Yeah, it sounds like stuff they did in those times for sure. And they all eventually relocated to Utah, where Ervil dropped in on other leaders of polygamous groups and demanded they give him 10% of their earnings or die. Unfazed, they all told him to get lost. Because like, dude, what the fuck, man? Like, he's just coming in.
Who are you? Yeah.
I am going to rule the world. I mean, it's just, God, it's like, it's so crazy. It's almost comical. It's like, what the, What the hell are you thinking, dude? I mean, I'm like, is it just mental illness at this point that's just like making him so crazy?
Or
is he
seems
just
like a psychopath.
Like he's brainwashed himself to the point that, or he's just that evil. And he's like,
maybe this just ounce of control he has has just gone straight to his head and made him insane.
And just the lawlessness of the land and where he's at. And he's just like, nobody's coming to stop me. So I'm unstoppable at this point.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, back in Los Molinos, the firstborn families have been sleeping with their guns by their sides and established organized patrols to watch their property. But that only do so much. Ervil had already planted spies within the firstborner clan and was always updated about what they were doing. But some of the spies started getting nervous following a police raid, including Noemi Zarate, the 10th wife of one of Ervil's spies. Noemi didn't like the violence and often complained about it, even threatening to tell the police the location of Ervil's whereabouts. Ervil immediately branded her as a traitor, and with the full blessing of Noemi's husband, Ervil commanded one of his wives, Vonda White, to assassinate her. The two women had known each other for years, so it wasn't hard for Vonda to convince Noemi to go for a ride with her. They drove to a canyon in the foothills of the San Pedro Mountains, and before exiting the canyon, Vonda shot and killed her. Another one of Ervil's wives, Yolanda Rios, who would be murdered a decade later, helped Vonda dig a shallow grave among the bushes where they dumped Noemi's body, which would never be found, which is so sad.
Yeah.
After receiving the news of Noemi's death, Ervil exclaimed, quote, "You don't know how pleased the Lord is that the traitor is dead." At that time, he still depended on the donations of other fundamentalist leaders in Utah, which hadn't been as successful as he would have liked. In a letter he sent to his polygamist rivals, he wrote, quote, "Repent ye therefore, or suffer destruction at the hand of God." Again, they just ignored him. He was like, fuck off, dude. Like, what are you talking about? One of the men Ervil had tried to extort money from had been Bob Simons, who lived on a 65-acre ranch near Grantsville, Utah, with his two wives. Bob, who had spent time in mental hospitals when he was younger, believed he was a prophet destined to convert Native Americans to the Mormon faith. Sure, dude.
Yeah. Immediately, I don't like this guy.
Yeah. Not a great mission there, but he refused to cave into the demands to join the Lamb of God Church, and Ervil had been itching to get his hands on Bob's land. Using a false name, Ervil paid Bob several visits as a supposed disciple of his church. The two men argued for hours over their theological differences, and at one point, the argument even turned into a wrestling match. After the fight, Ervil then started flirting with one of Bob's wives right in front of him. I mean, I'm like, I don't know about you, but I'm just seeing all this play out in my head, and I'm like, this is insane. Like,
it's like two teenagers.
Yeah.
They're arguing, and then they start wrestling. It's like, I'm going to steal your girl now.
Yeah.
Like, what?
I would love to see what his flirting was like. I'm sure it was terrible.
No,
hey, baby.
Yeah.
See what I just did to Bob?
Yeah.
Oh,
you want to be my 16th wife?
Yeah. God. And Bob was like, fuck you, dude. Get off my property or I'm going to call the authorities. Ervil later revealed to his followers that God wanted blood atonement to take out this false prophet Bob Simons. And he told his followers, quote, "We're going to blow him up like a balloon." What?
All right.
What does that even mean?
All right. I don't know.
Bomb him? Like,
you're just going to put helium up his butthole and blow him up?
We're going to wrestle again.
Yeah.
This time I'm going to bring helium. God. It's like this. I think his own kids even said this. Like, this shit is so crazy.
Yeah.
It's movie level. It's like,
it's so stupid. It seems almost fake.
It really does. One of Ervil's emissaries, Lloyd Sullivan, called Bob, claiming he now believed he was a true prophet after a conversation he had had with some local Native American chiefs. Okay. Smoking too much peyote or something, bro. Like, what are you talking about?
Good lure, because he knows that Bob, all he wants to do is convert the Native Americans, the local Native Americans. So he's just using them as...
Or convert them, then steal their land.
Yeah, right.
And their resources.
That's probably exactly what it is, yeah.
So that we can make our own commune and you can come join our commune. We'll control you and take all your land, but at least you're going to heaven now.
Yeah.
Well, he lied to Bob and said the chiefs were searching for a, quote, white prophet who would lead them to salvation, which I'm sure was never uttered out of any Native American's mouth ever.
Never, no.
Excited, Bob asked Lloyd when he could meet them. For many years, this was Bob's dream to make contact with the Native Americans. He could hardly believe that it was finally happening. Ervil's men lured Bob to a fabricated meeting with the Native Americans on April 23, 1975. The hitmen stopped by a gardening store to buy pickaxes, shovels, and a bag of chemicals to speed up the human decomposition process.
Okay.
They made one more stop, but this time to dig a coffin-sized hole in the middle of the desert. Lloyd pulled the car up beside a pile of rocks and cut the engine, and you could see a smile on Bob's face. So Bob thinks he's about to have this
become the white
grand
prophet.
experience with Native Americans, and oh boy, he's not ready for what's about to happen next. He left the headlights on as Bob got out of the car and stood in front of it, raising a hand to his brow as he searched for the Native Americans.
Dumbass. Yeah.
Where are they? Wait, where are we? He was too focused on looking for them to notice the two young men creeping up behind him. One of them raised a shotgun to the back of his head and squeezed the trigger, killing Bob instantly. To think that Bob's final thought, like as terrible as this is, it's just like, what? This is just so nuts. It's like, he's thinking he's about to have Native Americans walking about, Bob.
Yeah.
You know,
our
like,
white prophet. Yeah. These people.
Meanwhile, he's literally taken a bullet to the back of the head.
Yeah.
Many assumed that Ervil LeBaron's reign of terror would end with the murder of his religious opponents, but this was only the intro to a much more disturbing chapter of his life.
It gets crazier.
Yeah, you thought that was crazy. Well, you ain't seen
Strap
nothing
in.
yet. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus.
So there was this guy, Dean Vest. He's a towering figure. He stood 6'8".
Damn.
At 260. That's
a big man.
That's a heavyweight MMA fighter right
Big
there.
Yeah, that's like an offensive lineman.
Yeah, seriously.
That's
yeah.
a big dude.
He was also a Vietnam War veteran, and he had settled down in San Diego. While there, he followed his father's path into the Church of the Firstborn. Despite his father eventually leaving the church, Dean decided to stay behind. He then caught the eye of Ervil, which probably wasn't that hard because he was a very large, hulking figure, and Ervil appointed him as the church's military general. Drawing on his experience in military combat, Dean played a key role in developing the plans and tactics used by Ervil's followers.
After all the failed assassination attempts, I can see why Ervil wanted some help.
Yeah, seriously. These plans included creating the blueprint for the infamous Los Molinos raid. And Dean rose through the ranks pretty quickly, but his wife Cheryl had issues with the church's male-centric teachings, so she left him, took their kids. She fled back to Washington State. Dean was obviously heartbroken and started doubting his dedication to the church. And to cope, he put his energy into repairing an old boat with dreams of sailing along the West Coast, hoping it would help him reconnect with his family. Yet, Dean's dreams concerned Ervil, and he began seeing Dean as a potential threat to his authority. So to Ervil, allowing Dean to leave the church without consequence and just go sail the seas would risk triggering a mass exodus from the church, or at least that's how Ervil saw it. And according to the rules of civil law within the church, which was written by Ervil, Ervil decreed that Dean must be blood atoned for his betrayal. This was when Ervil commanded Vonda White, his 10th wife, to carry out yet another assassination. And at this time, Vonda was actually a friend of Dean's, and she had been living near San Diego with a household full of children. She was also pregnant at the time, but this wouldn't stop her from carrying out Ervil's orders. And on June 16th, 1976, Dean had just learned of a car accident involving his wife and daughter. He quickly prepared to head to Seattle to check on them, but he first had to make a stop at Vonda's home to collect some of his belongings.
Because he assumes he's going to just visit his friend.
Yeah.
Probably get some support from her about what's going on in his life with his wife and kid.
And snag a few things and leave. And
meanwhile, all hell's about to break loose.
Yeah, he was completely oblivious, and Dean was about to carry some bags back to his car from Vonda's house when Vonda asked him if he could take a look at her washing machine. Unknown to him, Vonda actually concealed a loaded .38 revolver under her maternity dress. And Dean took a look at the washer and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. This was when Vonda stepped behind him wearing rubber kitchen gloves, and she pulled the handgun from beneath her dress. She then raised the gun while he wasn't looking and squeezed the trigger. The first shot ruptured Dean's liver, and he turned in an attempt to make a dash for the door. The second shot pierced his lung, and as he continued turning away from his attacker, blood kind of spewed out from his mouth in a 5-foot arc all across the kitchen as he collapsed to the floor. Vonda then went up to him and delivered one more fatal shot, execution style, which landed in his head just behind his left ear. She then washed up, called emergency services. She told the dispatcher that shots have been fired in an eerily calm voice, and she tried to fabricate a story when the police arrived, but I mean, they immediately grew suspicious of her accounts of what happened. So she fled to Denver, where Ervil had kind of relocated some of his followers to evade scrutiny and legal repercussions, but this would later divide his followers between Denver, Utah, and Mexico.
Right in her own backyard.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Church of Lamb members struggled to make ends meet. Despite financial success in the appliance repair business, they were all subjected to grueling labor, the opposite of what Ervil had promised them. They eventually resorted to stealing cars, committing credit card fraud, forgery, and even carrying out a few bank robberies so they could keep their operations afloat. Surrounded by the growing dissatisfaction within the church, Ervil also faced another challenge, his daughter, Rebecca. At 15, Ervil had arranged for Rebecca, who went by Becky, to marry Victor Chenoweth, a wealthy disciple. However, Rebecca became miserable in her marriage, and Victor had been distant, and his first wife had been a bully, making Becky's life unbearable. When the cult split between Utah and Denver, Becky was sent to Colorado and forced to leave her baby Victor Jr. behind, which is just agonizing to think about.
Yeah.
So resentful and heartbroken over the separation, she began antagonizing customers and coworkers, and at 17 years old, she became pregnant again, and she began threatening to contact law enforcement, thinking she was protected by her status as the cult's leader's daughter. Fed up with Becky's behavior, Ervil claimed to experience another lethal revelation from God. So God, according to Ervil, is just handing out execution orders.
For his own daughter, too.
Right.
God.
In April, he allowed Becky to go get her son Victor Jr. from Denver. Overjoyed, she prepared for the trip. She figured she would reunite with her child and then seek refuge with her mother in Mexico. On the day they planned to head to Denver, some of the men from the church picked Becky up in a car. But the young men in the front seat had different plans separate from Becky's. Dwayne Chenoweth and Eddie Marston were mentally preparing themselves with something they had practiced for weeks: how to strangle someone to death with rope. Along an isolated road outside the Dallas suburbs, Dwayne steered the car off the road and Eddie picked up the rope from the car floor. According to reports, Becky's struggle lasted longer than the men anticipated. She fought with everything she had, especially for her unborn child. But in the end, she was overpowered and murdered. After this, the only emotion Ervil showed was anger. He was furious that the trunk of his car got stained with Becky's blood, and that he was forced to exchange it for a new car. Like, that just shows how evil this guy is.
Brutal.
It's interesting how his name literally contains the word evil.
Yeah.
Remove the R and it's literally evil. As his daughter's body lay abandoned in an Oklahoma State park, several of his followers started to become disillusioned by Ervil.
Finally.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, this is so brutal. The fact that he did this to his own daughter with an unborn child. I mean, can't think of really too many things that are worse than that.
Yeah.
The murder of his own daughter had them all questioning the legitimacy of Ervil's divinity. I mean, I would think you'd have to start thinking, like, is this really coming from God?
Yeah, come on.
I thought God was good and merciful. And
I mean, there is the wrath of the Old Testament God, but man, you've strayed pretty far from whatever Bible lessons you were once reading if you think that murdering your pregnant daughter is acceptable here.
Yeah.
So while all this murderous rampage is going on, Ervil claimed to receive yet another divine revelation to marry Rena Chenoweth. This would be his 13th and final wife, and they would marry in February 1975. At the time, Rena was only 16 years old. Ervil was 50. Ugh. In her memoir, titled The Blood Covenant, Rena recounted Ervil's years of molestation before she finally submitted and agreed to make their union legal. However, according to Rena, Ervil couldn't perform on their wedding night, which apparently continued for several days, and when he finally managed to consummate the marriage, Rena found the experience repulsive, which is not surprising at all. She recalled closing her eyes, imagining herself being somewhere else, or imagining Ervil as being someone else. She also remembered his unpleasant breath, awkward kisses, which even further disgusted her. But despite all this disgust and repulsion, I mean, she's 16 years old and she has by now developed this warped sense of loyalty towards him over time, and to the point where she was willing to kill for him. So Ervil was frustrated by all his failures to get rid of his younger brother Verlin, seize control of the firstborners. So they came up with yet another assassination plot, and Verlin became a difficult target by constantly moving between safe houses in Mexico, California, Nicaragua. So Ervil concocted a plan to lure Verlin out of hiding by murdering Rulin Allred, which we had talked about earlier, and then attacking Verlin during the funeral. If you remember, Rulin was a well-known rival polygamist from Utah who refused to pay Ervil and had publicly ridiculed the firstborners, and he used to be one of his really good friends. Ervil then claimed Rulin was guilty of character assassination, which was punishable by death. Totally ridiculous. So Ervil saw the funeral as the perfect opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, and he assumed that Verlin would likely attend the service just out of mere respect for him. So on May 10th, 1977, disguised in cheap wigs and fake glasses, Rena and another young woman named Ramona Marston entered Rulin's homeopathic clinic located on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. As Rulin emerged from the back room, Rena spotted him, and in her memoir, Rena recalled that he looked exactly as Ervil had described. He was tall, slender, with a head full of gray hair. He stood no more than 3 to 5 feet away from her. Without a word, Rena reached into her jacket, pulled out a .25 caliber pistol, and in a single motion, she fired 7 bullets into Rulin's chest. He even raised his hands to deflect the shot before collapsing to the ground, dead. So at Rulin's funeral, this was held at Bingham High School and turned out to be a pretty big event. Over 2,600 people from across the country, including police and news media, came to pay their final respects. So this guy had a pretty big pull. And after seeing the outpouring of support, Ervil's hired assassins actually just abandoned the mission to kill Verlin because there were far too many potential witnesses here. You got 2,600 people. So they just backed out, and once again, Ervil's attempt to murder his brother failed.
Rena also recalled that Ervil employed your typical cult techniques to maintain control over his followers. He would isolate them by restricting their interactions with individuals outside the church. He would also subject them to lengthy sermons to wear them down, and would instill fear by claiming that religious and government assassins were pursuing them to emphasize the importance of unity for their survival, which is all very effective, especially if you're born into this situation. The children within the cult typically didn't receive any formal education after the 5th or 6th grade, as Ervil feared exposure to the outside world might lead them to question their sheltered lives. True.
Common tactic. Yeah.
Yep. Because any knowledge outside of the group was deemed evil and dangerous. Starting from the age of 10, children were assigned household chores or tasks within the family business, and as they matured, they found themselves with no alternative paths due to their lack of education, skills, and support networks, so they're stuck. There's really nowhere to go. However, when Ervil's actions escalated to murder, some of the cult members realized Ervil's true nature. A handful managed to escape and reported their experiences to the authorities, and eventually justice caught up with the cult's crimes. Rena testified during the trial for the murder of Rulin Allred, but despite her testimony, the jury deemed the evidence insufficient to convict Rena or the others, and they were ultimately acquitted. Just like, wow, that's insane. Except for Vonda White. She would be eventually captured and tried for the murder of Dean Vest, the church's military general, and on May 13, 1979, she was sentenced to life in prison. A few weeks later, on June 1st, 1979, the Mexican police finally captured Ervil LeBaron hiding in the mountains just south of Mexico City. The Mexican authorities handed Ervil over to the FBI once they reached the United States. Apparently, the Mexican police used him as a punching bag during their 6-day journey to the border, because Ervil arrived covered in welts and bruises. Ervil remained at the Salt Lake County Jail until May 12, 1980, when he went on trial for masterminding Rulon Allred's murder and for plotting to kill his brother Verlin. After a steady stream of ex-cult members testified against him, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison at the Point of the Mountain State Prison in Draper, Utah. But not even prison could stop Ervil's thirst for revenge. While he was confined behind bars, he managed to write the Book of the New Covenants. It was his final work, and it would also be his most notorious. This 500-page manifesto contained a hit list of over 50 people that Ervil deemed worthy of blood atonement, including cult defectors, police investigators, and prison officials. He distributed copies of the manuscript among his remaining followers before his death on August 16, 1981, of an apparent heart attack. Some reports say he suffered from a massive seizure and that foul play was unlikely, but prison guards found him in a suspicious position, slumped over in his cell with his hand clutching at his throat. In a bizarre coincidence, hours later on the exact same day, his brother Verlin died in a car accident in Mexico. The Book of the New Covenants detailed who had the responsibility of carrying on Ervil's ministry after his death. Ervil's influence continued even beyond the grave, and not long after his death, people on his hit list began falling victim to violence. His power and his control over his followers is next level.
Yeah, that's why they call him the Mormon Manson, but not even Manson had this amount of control and power over people.
And this many people under his control.
Yeah. So in June 1983, Ervil's son, 20-year-old Isaac, who had testified against Ervil in court, died under suspicious circumstances. He had even been on his father's hit list, and the 20-year-old apparently committed suicide while staying with cult relatives in Houston. So, I mean, you can kind of connect the dots there. But sometime that fall, tragedy struck again, and Lorna, Ervil's eighth wife, had planned to escape the cult, but she was found strangled and buried in a shallow grave in Mexico. Experts have stated they believe she was likely murdered by her own sons. A few months later, in December of 1983, Ervil's eldest son, who was 33-year-old Arturo, he had also become head of the church by this time, also met his demise, and he was gunned down in Mexico by a rival leader named Leo Ivaniuk. It was supposedly over a religious dispute. Ervil's 20-year-old son, Ervil LeBaron, then assumed control of his father's cult after the death of his older brother, and his reign began with yet another purge of traitors who had sided with Ivaniuk. Many of Heber's accomplices were his siblings, who were also Ervil's children. So we are in full-blown the next generation of power here, and a lot of Ervil's children are still very loyal to him. So in early 1984, Heber shot Gamaliel Rios in the face, but his body was never found. Then Yolanda Rios, Ervil's 12th wife, was strangled in May 1984 and buried somewhere outside of Dallas. The violence went beyond just the LeBaron family, and in May 1987, Leo Ivaniuk, the rival leader responsible for Arturo LeBaron's death, was found murdered near Santa Cruz, California, leaving only his dentures behind. Later that year, Ervil's once right-hand man, Dan Jordan, was shot in the head during a hunting trip in Utah, and his murder remains unsolved to this day. After all these brutal assassinations, you think it couldn't get any worse, but on June 27, 1988, this would become arguably the darkest day of the cult's history, which is wild to think about because Ervil's not even alive at this rate, and out of all the violence that has escalated, this is the bloodiest day. Ervil had called for the deaths of 3 former members. These were Mark Chenoweth, Dwayne Chenoweth, and Ed Marston. They had all fled the cult and tried to restart their lives, and because of this, Ervil branded them all as traitors in his final writings. His orders were carried out at almost the exact same time, precisely 4 p.m. that day, in what would later be known as the 4 o'clock murders. So in Houston, Dwayne Chenoweth was ambushed after being lured to a vacant house on Rena Street to pick up a used appliance. He was with his younger daughter, Jennifer. Unfortunately, Jennifer not only witnessed her father die, but she was also murdered herself. So eyewitnesses reported that the driver of the suspected vehicle stepped out of his truck to engage in conversation with the appliance delivery man. After a brief exchange, the suspect then shot Dwayne twice in the head. Then they shot 8-year-old Jennifer in the mouth and the temple while she was sitting in the passenger seat, and this killed her instantly. Across the state, Eddie Marson met a similar fate, and Mark Chenoweth was gunned down almost exactly at 4 p.m. outside his Houston appliance store. Even after the police arrested some of the cult members on auto theft charges, they still would not talk to police about these murders. It wasn't until one of the family members, Cynthia LeBaron, came forward and told police what had happened. The cult had killed her sister, Natasha, and Cynthia believed that she was next, so she decided to just get ahead of it, call local police, and tell them everything she knew about what was going on. By May 1993, Heber LeBaron, his sister Patricia, and Douglas Lee Barlow were all sentenced to life in prison for the murders. Richard LeBaron, who was the teenager who killed Dwayne and Jennifer Chenoweth, received a 5-year sentence, and Cynthia LeBaron was granted immunity for her testimony against her siblings. Aaron LeBaron, another member, was sentenced to 45 years in prison in 1997 for various charges related to the killings. However, Jacqueline Tarsal LeBaron, who was suspected of being the architect of some of these murders, remained at large for almost 20 years until she was finally arrested in Honduras in May of 2010. She was sentenced to only 3 years in prison. So, holy crap. It was just the whole family murdering a ton of people.
Yeah, it's insane to think that this just continued to go on even with Ervil gone. And I mean, Ervil died at 56. I think, I really wonder exactly how he died.
If it was hard, maybe.
Did he kill himself, you think?
Possibly.
I mean, the kind of clutching at the throat, he like hit himself to the point that he maybe like collapses windpipe or something, and he suffocated. It seems very kind of sketchy, the details around that.
It does. Just, dying heart attack at, what was he, 56?
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems a bit suspicious there, alone in your prison cell.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's interesting because like, why would he want to stay alive, you know? Like, obviously he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life, but he could still kind of, I'm like comparing it to like Warren Jeffs, how he still is
pulling strings,
running his sect from prison.
Yeah.
So, or if something did happen to him, or if he took drugs or something, or I don't know. It's all very sketchy. I mean, it's hard to know what's true and what's not.
And unfortunately, when you just die in prison under the watch of like a prison guard, that story can change.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone can fabricate whatever they want.
Right. Well, now the known killers are behind bars, but many ex-cult members still fear assassination. They're not exactly sure who now leads the LeBaron group, or if the new leader plans to continue the killings on Ervil's hit list nearly 40 years after his death. This is why Rena Chenoweth, Ervil's 13th and final wife, remains in hiding. She fled while he was in prison for the murder of Rulin, and Ervil saw this as a betrayal, so he added her to the hit list. And I think like even Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, was on the hit list too. Yeah, like he just had...
What did Jimmy do?
Tons of people. I assume for coming after polygamists, or maybe like his beliefs were too far from his, or I don't know. I just saw that name pop up on his, which it might be 500 pages or 400 pages. There's some, I'm not exactly sure. I've never seen that book. Can you get that book? Like, can you buy that?
That's a good question. I haven't seen it like
I highly doubt it. Like, that it's a publisher's like,
you would lose your reputation if you did that. Yeah.
But there's some reports that's 400 pages, 500 pages, and that Jimmy Carter's on it. There's other
it could
profile names.
It could also play into his like world domination thing, like assassinate the president, we're going to take over.
All world leaders.
Yeah.
With essentially your family members, your kids, like they're just going to keep doing this and keep getting locked up and caught.
Well, joke's on you, Ervil, because Jimmy Carter is still alive.
Yeah, that dude is still alive.
Oldest president, I think.
Is he 100 yet?
He's got to be close if he's not already.
He's got to be 98?
99.
Yeah. When's his birthday?
October 1st.
All right.
So he turns 100 in October. Wow.
That's so wild. Yeah, his wife died not too long ago. If he could hit 100 and then pass peacefully, I think that would be legendary.
I don't want another Betty White situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, God. That's crazy, man.
Good old Jimmy. The last non-lizard president.
There you go. Rena continues to live in secrecy to this day. Her book chronicles the horrors she endured during their 5-year marriage and the years that followed. In a haunting confession, she admitted to killing Rulon in cold blood, manipulated by her husband's claim that it was God's will. While Rena and others directly carried out the murders, many also see them as victims of Ervil's manipulation, which is why he got the name Mormon Manson, which I think is, you just can't deny the fact that he manipulated them, he brainwashed them into carrying out these evil acts. Regardless of individual beliefs, Rena ended her book with a warning. Ervil LeBaron still has devoted followers and they remain dangerous.
So
that is
scary.
frightening to think that this mafia essentially is still out there.
Yeah.
Should we be careful?
Should we not talk shit about the LeBarons?
Yeah, fuck. God. I'm like, where? And they're in Denver? Like, what?
Damn.
I'm like, do we even think about that? Like, they could have some members out here.
Yeah. Come find me, I dare you.
Oh, I'd be careful with that.
Fuck, actually, you might want to take that out.
April Fools.
Some crazy Mormons trying to break into my home and kill me. Yeah, leave that thread out, I'd say.
Austin's address is
123
Come
Michigan
find me
Lane.
street. Yeah. Michigan Lane. There's Detroit Street in Denver. That would be hilarious if I lived on that. Which I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, it's crazy. It's estimated that Ervil LeBaron's reign claimed the lives of around 30 people, including his own wives, brother, former church members, rival polygamist leaders, and his own 17-year-old pregnant daughter, Becky. So 30 people. And of course, he's like, well, I didn't kill them.
Yeah, I have no blood on my hands.
Yeah.
What a coward this guy is.
I know. Like, total piece of shit, right?
Had everybody else do his dirty work for him.
Yeah. Well, he just sat in a bathtub reading the Bible and dictating.
Or writing his 500-page manifestos and books.
To take out Jimmy Carter. But that hit list period of violence had ended roughly around 2013 when the hit list was supposedly exhausted. Now, I don't have eyes on this hit list. I'm not really sure, but, if Jimmy Carter was on it, I don't think they got everyone that Ervil wanted dead. But the legacy of Ervil LeBaron's atrocities still continue to this day, and many residents in the Mexican colonies are still affiliated with various branches of Mormonism, including independent polygamist groups. And while some residents continue polygamous practices, others may hold the belief without actively engaging in it. And the presence of almost all these individuals in Mexico can be traced back to the LeBaron family. In 2019, there was another scare near the Arizona-Mexico border. This is terrifying. This is kind of a side note that I found. 9 U.S. citizens connected to these Mormon sects in Mexico, including 6 children, were ambushed and murdered. 8 other children were injured, and many of the victims were relatives and friends of a member of the LeBaron family, who was Julian LeBaron. Several families' cars were attacked while they were on their way to the LeBaron colony for a wedding. The victims had been shot and some of them were burned. This made many think it might have been some other hit list from Ervil's old list, but authorities began to realize that the violence in these Mormon sect communities weren't really... the LeBaron hit list is kind of old news.
So it wasn't like, more LeBaron thugs running around necessarily.
Yeah, it was kind of like an initial scare, but when they started to look into what was going on, as time went on, it was more obvious that these attacks were actually more likely cartel activity. And these attacks caused many of the Mormon offshoots in Mexico to just pack up and leave. They were done with it. But this wasn't the first time the Mormon sects ran into problems with the drug cartel. And in 2009, another LeBaron descendant, Benjamin LeBaron, was murdered by the cartel after speaking out against them. And Julian, who I had just mentioned earlier, also became an outspoken critic of the cartel after the 2019 attacks, but he eventually fled to the U.S. after his life was threatened by the cartel. But to this day, there are still ties to the LeBaron legacy in Mexico, along with a colony that still carries the family name. Descendants of Joel LeBaron, if you remember, that's Ervil's brother who he had murdered, have also stepped in the spotlight and talked about the cartel violence, including Ruth Warner, who is Joel's daughter. Ruth had escaped the cult when she was 15 and accused her uncle Ervil of sexually assaulting her, and today she has more than 40 siblings. So here's a bit of Ruth, a short clip of Ruth talking about the cartel and her family's legacy in Mexico.
Benjamin LeBaron was murdered in 2009 after he spoke out against the cartels.
It's kind of sad, actually, and very heartbreaking that it's come back to my family's life there in LeBaron with the drug cartels. So there's always been that history of violence, but it's just come from different places. When I was young, it came from our family.
But kind of wrapping things up, I wanted to mention again that Hulu 5-part documentary series called Daughters of the Cult. This dives into the lives of Anna and Celia LeBaron, who are, again, deeply involved with their father, Ervil LeBaron's Mormon Fundamentalist group. Very well done. I really like that they just let the family members tell their story, and it's very interesting. I highly recommend watching it after listening to this episode, because you'll just get, kind of that firsthand experience from those that lived it.
Yeah.
It's just insane.
Which is kind of rare to get that generational viewpoint, because it's like most cults, it's either like everybody dies or people just go into hiding after they leave the cult and never want to talk about it again. So it's interesting that we still have remnants of it.
Yeah. I love these new documentary series that are coming out with, the victims and the family being able to tell their stories. And this also does, goes all the way back to the very beginning and takes you all the way through to where things are at today and how the family's doing with all of this, in their history. But they both agreed that their father claimed absolute divine authority and was extremely strict. He expected complete submission from them at a young age. And they also recalled how the rift between their father and their uncle Joel escalated to the point where Ervil was arming all of his children with guns and weapons and, training them up. Their father's evasion of the FBI forced them to constantly move, and they lived a secretive and anxious life across the United States and Mexico. Late night departures were common, and they were forbidden from asking or answering questions, and they lived in a constant state of fear and distrust. And just the conditions they lived in too is quite mind-blowing. I mean, it's not like they had bedrooms. All the kids would literally just grab a blanket and like pile up in a corner.
Yeah, there were so many of them.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just a really tough life to live. Celia highlighted how they were trained to always respond, quote, "I don't know," to outsiders, regardless of the question. And the church group constantly silenced the women and denied them the right to disagree or express any opinion of their own. When Anna was 13, she escaped from her mother's home to join her sister Lillian in Houston. Meanwhile, Celia endured years of abuse before finally escaping and finding her sisters. Tragically, though, Lillian would later take her own life, and this inspired Anna and Celia to remain determined to be a voice that helps others who are facing or have faced similar challenges of being in a cult. Anna said in an interview, quote, "It's been over 40 years since I left my father's cult. I've overcome a lot, and I want others to know they can too." We have a little clip of Anna talking about this.
There are still people in the LeBaron colony who practice polygamy today. Not all of them do. And the colony has been Americanized over the years.
But yeah, wild, it's still there, still kicking down there. And it just goes to show the power of religion carrying on. Be, led by an absolute tyrant, a murderer, basically, I don't know, he was never diagnosed, but, a psychopath. And those roots can just take hold and last for generations.
I imagine that's something very difficult to shake yourself from.
Yeah.
And to reprogram yourself and just enter, the world with everybody else, with having all this baggage and all these things that you went through. And, carrying on. And I know a lot of them are still very religious this day, obviously, in a very different form of religion than what they grew up with. But a lot of them have said that their faith has really helped kind of keep them strong and keep them on the better path for their life. And so a lot of them haven't even, left religion completely. They just have, obviously found a much healthier version of it that has helped them in many ways. But obviously, the takeaway, I think, is, being aware of these types of groups. They do exist, and there are groups out there that exist to this day. So, if there's anything you can do, if you or someone has information about any violent or dangerous cult, or if there's suspicions of criminal activities that include abuse, neglect, or fraud, obviously report it to your local law enforcement immediately. If you have concerns regarding the well-being of children within the group, because again, tons and tons of children. We're talking about hundreds of children.
Yeah, it was like 40 or 50 just in Ervil LeBaron's side of the family, not mentioning all the others.
And is interesting in the documentary, they can't even name all of their siblings, and they don't even know. They were going back and forth about how many siblings they actually have. They're like, one was like 51, 52, and they're like, we just don't even know. We've never even actually counted to figure it out. And I like in the documentary, they kind of create like a family tree, and it's just mind blowing when you look at the LeBaron family tree and just how many people are in this family. So I'm very curious how the LeBaron family, especially that still exists down in Mexico, it sounds like they've Americanized things, and there's the conditions are probably better, but then they're still living amidst all of this cartel violence. It's still very dangerous.
And I know polygamy has been outlawed in Mexico as well. Obviously that came way after the U.S. outlawed it. But I know it's outlawed today, so I wonder, they must be doing polygamy in secret, kind of, outside the law a little bit, if it's still going on down there.
Right. Well, if you do have any concerns regarding the well-being of children within, a particular group, obviously report it to the authorities, but report it to Child Protective Services at 1-800-422-4453. This hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and provide information on how to make a report. And to report any suspicious activities or express concerns regarding a particular cult, you can reach out to reputable federal cult monitoring organizations such as the Rick Ross Institute at cultofeducation.com or CultWatch at cultwatch.com. Because, there's definitely offshoots of Mormon fundamentalists to, every religion really at this point probably has some extreme sect existing in secret to this day. Or just, we've talked about a lot of different cults on this show to, just cults that are just based off crazy beliefs, off, somebody, God, just thinking back to all the cults that we've covered, and
I know,
scary.
It's brutal. And I did want to mention, because it's Rick Ross is not the rapper Rick Ross. It's actually Rick Allen Ross. And I've come across this guy before. He's a pretty famous deprogrammer, cult specialist. And I wanted to look up just to make sure I was correct on this, but yeah, he worked on deprogramming members of the Branch Davidians prior to the Waco siege. So he's seen quite a lot, but he's regarded as a cult specialist that's really good at deprogramming people, which is, I know that's a really, 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 really hard process once you've been in something for so long. Even just you and I growing up religious, even kind of like deprogramming ourselves to a certain degree, with a more maybe, Catholicism is a bit more conventional religion, but like even that was hard, kind of rewiring my brain around certain things. And I can't imagine if you're in like a murderous cult that is, manipulation tier 10, it must be super tough. So I'm glad there are professionals out there who can help.
Absolutely. I can't imagine deprogramming yourself after you grew up with your father being Ervil LeBaron and knowing all the things that he did and all the violence that ensued due to his decisions and loved ones and family members that fell victim to him. It's on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
There's another fundamentalist group I don't think quite as violent. That I definitely want to cover in the future. The Kingston clan.
Oh, is that on the list?
Yeah, it is on the list.
I think I saw that.
They're a whole other group, and there's a lot of these fundamentalist groups, specifically within the Mormon religion that exists, that are just so crazy.
Yeah,
and have become criminal syndicates. I mean, the Kingston clan is more. It's almost more so like organized crime. But yeah, it's crazy. It never ends. But we definitely want to know your thoughts on Ervil LeBaron, and let us know if you've seen Daughters of the Cult, because I'm curious to know your thoughts on that as well. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode there. If you enjoyed the episode, definitely make sure you're subscribed, following us on Spotify, YouTube, all the places. We really appreciate it. It does help us out. But we'll see you guys next time. And until then, lights out, everybody.